had a fail, so we weren't able to stream one of the presentations. But otherwise, everything went pretty flawlessly. All right, we should be live in about 10 seconds. And yesterday, YouTube had a fail. Yep, you're able to stream one of the presentations. And we are on 20-second delay, as you can tell. So I am unmuting Chris.
I am unmuted. Is this too loud?
That's perfect. Okay. Well, I think, and Phyllis, whenever you and Chris are ready, I'm going to let you introduce yourselves, your tradition, and your talk. I just want to welcome everyone to day 2 of Puget Sound Pagan Pride 2020. We have another 20 amazing presenters, a lot of 20s for today. And that includes crafts, more talks, and a lot of interactivity. So with that, I'm going to be quiet and mute myself and let you start presenting.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Fielding. I am Phyllis's secretarial assistant for this talk. If you have questions, please put them into the chat function, and we'll try and answer those at the end of the talk. If we don't have time, we'll try to reach out to you otherwise. But without further ado, let me introduce Phyllis Curott. Phyllis is a spiritual pioneer and one of America's first public witches. She's been a Wiccan priestess for about 20 years and an attorney handling groundbreaking cases that establish the legal rights of witches. Phyllis is also the author of 4 internationally best-selling books that have made witchcraft accessible to the world and helped make it the fastest growing spirituality in America. Phyllis was named one of the 10 gutsiest women of the year by Jane Magazine and inducted into the Martin Luther King Jr. Collegium of Clergy and Scholars. She received the 2018 Service to Humanity Award from One Spirit Interfaith Seminary, where she teaches Wicca, Goddess, and Earth-based spirituality. Phyllis was the first Wiccan trustee of the Parliament of the World Religion and was elected vice chair in the 2015 Parliament, helping to create the historic inaugural Women's Assembly and drafting the Declaration for the Dignity and Human Rights of Women, which was adopted by the Parliament in 2015. New York Magazine has called her teachings on witchcraft the culture's next big idea, and Time Magazine has published her as one of America's leading thinkers. Ladies and gentlemen, Phyllis Curott.
Phyllis, you're still on mute.
Yeah, I'm trying. There we go. Good. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Terrific. Thank you, Lawrence, for unmuting. And thank you, everybody. I know you're facing some rather dire circumstances out there. And in fact, in anticipating this talk, I drew a card from the Witch's Wisdom Tarot, which I would like to share with you. So bear with me while I bring down the image of the card. And here we go. Yeah. I'm going to read to you from the text I wrote, which I think you'll see right away is rather different than the average tarot text. So, the world is on fire. The time of ancestral prophecy of dismemberment, of unmaking is here. Civilizations and their illusions of separation and control are coming to an end. Mother Earth cannot be dominated. The goddess is rising to protect her endangered children. Grandmother Spider weaves the web of the universe, and the goddess Kali wields the sickle knife, destroying the destroyers of life. But in her other hand, Kali holds the spindle from which Grandmother Spider weaves. Together they tear and mend, unmaking to repair and make again. You cannot see them, but you can see their magic everywhere. It's all one, and this is where it begins. Beyond the blazing towers and deadly heat waits the world as it is meant to be, wholly green and summoning. There are those who respond to the call from the world, from that which lives beyond human limitations. By coincidence, by choice, and by sacred ways, they journey to discover their way home. A young woman, her gaze fixed on the ground before her, Hat pulled low upon her brow and heavy pack on her shoulders, walks alone. She carries the weight of the old world with her, remnants of what she has been taught to believe about the world and about herself. She has been bound by constraints and limits, and she longs for a better way to live. She knows there's another world within her, another world awaiting her. She has broken free. She strides into the unknown. Her pilgrimage has begun. As I said, I drew this card asking where to begin today's presentation and was not surprised when this card appeared. The deck is naturally, as a witch's wisdom tarot would be, full of magic. But this is, of course, a very different world than the card that most people are used to seeing. It is an expression of the really terrible challenges that are facing you on the West Coast now, today, and the challenges that are facing all of us. On the West Coast, it's fire, and where I am on the East Coast, it's floods. And as you've seen, it's a very different image than most tarot decks. It's a very different deck. There's more magic in this card than I have time to describe today. I have so much more in this presentation than I can squeeze into an hour, but I'm going to come back to it shortly. So I just want to start now, having honored what is, to thank you all for joining me today for one of my first talks about the Witch's Wisdom Tarot, which I created with the British artist Danielle Barlow. It's going to be out right before Samhain, and it's in pre-sales now. And I want to thank Puget Sound Pagan Pride for the invitation, and Lewis, and of course my dear Chris. And I want to thank my oracle and all the spirits that guided us in its creation. So I became a witch because of a tarot reading about 40 years ago, in fact, and I would love to share that story, but I think we're constrained by time. So I will simply get to the point of it, aside from the fact that I became a witch because of a tarot reading by a witch 40 years ago. I've been reading tarot since I became a witch, and I was really thrilled, therefore, when I was asked by Hay House to create a new witch's tarot. I jumped at the chance. I mean, divination for me has always been an essential part of my spiritual journey, and I think it is for most of you if you're listening to this. It's been my primary source of guidance on a path that few would take, especially years ago. It is a magical mirror to understand myself, to discover the story and the magic of my life, and to help others as I became skillful with reading, to help others find themselves and their magic. And of course, everybody comes to tarot, as I did also, to see the future that's waiting for us. And over the years, I began to appreciate how, in fact, divination was not just a prophesier of what lay ahead, but a wise guide to show us how to create the future that we long for. And in these really dangerous and very difficult times, we need guidance. We need guidance to find ourselves. We need guidance to find our purpose. We need guidance to find our way home to the divine magic of life. And sometimes that can be very difficult when the world around you seems to be on fire. But divination provides that guidance. For me, it has always been an important and a really profound spiritual practice. It's a way to see the sacred. It's a way to speak with the sacred. It's the way to receive truly the wisest guidance that's always in your best interests. And most of all, it's a way to experience the presence of the sacred, a living, caring, compassionate presence that's always there for you. You just need to ask. Over many years, I've come to the conclusion that truly all magic flows from our connection to the sacred. And divination really is magic in action. And the divine will use anything to speak with us. Since the late 1400s, with the appearance of the Italian tarocchi, it's been using the tarot. But in fact, tarot decks are created by humans. They reflect our worldview, they reflect our biases, and they reflect our spiritual perspectives. So let me return to a very wise quote by a very wise woman, Rachel Pollack, who has written some marvelous books as a tarot reader and wise woman. And she said, quite sagely, any system of divination will tell us something. but the quality of that something depends on the values within the system. The greatest influence on modern tarot decks, including many witches decks, actually, is the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And so in contemplating how to create a new deck that would be meaningful and have something unique to contribute, I needed to understand better. Even though I'd used it for so many years in various forms and incarnations, I needed to understand what the values in that deck, which is ubiquitous. It's the gold standard for, it's the most popular deck in the world, and really is the gold standard for the creation of most subsequent decks. And as I said, including a lot of witches decks. It was created in 1910, over 100 years ago, by the artist Patricia Coleman Smith and the writer Arthur Waite. They were both initiates of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. That was a British esoteric order. And it was devoted to the alchemical refinement of the human spirit. And in fact, they had a profound influence on the revival of modern witchcraft. And we recognize it in the magical tools. And we recognize it in, we recognize it as well. Let me go one more. Do we have it here? We'll go back. Here we go. Sorry. There you go. So you see the pentacle, the sword, the cup, and the wand or the staff. So the Golden Dawn had a really profound impact on the rebirth of contemporary witchcraft. And Smith's contribution was also incredibly influential for all the subsequent tarot decks. One of the things that she did that was truly amazing, and I think accounts for its enormous popularity. It's the most popular deck in the world, and it is the gold standard, alchemical pun, for future decks, is in fact, its depiction of daily life. It was a revolutionary innovation. She was inspired by a few of the decks, but really went further than anybody ever had, moving from the symbols of pentacles and cups and wands and swords to depictions of human life. And it made it an incredibly useful system for understanding the present moment, understanding ourselves, understanding our psychology, understanding the events of our lives and the meaning of the life that we were leading. So not only did she use the alchemical symbols of the Golden Dawn, but she used them as metaphors for the journey of human life. And it was profoundly accurate and continues to be so. The second half of the revolution of the Rider-Waite deck, and one of the reasons that it continues to be so remarkable in its influence, was the interpretation of the major arcana that was provided by Arthur Waite. He also gave them the name of the major and the minor arcana, which referred to the mysteries known only to an initiate. And he numbered and he named and he numbered them. He created the order in which those cards move and so the order in which the journey of the soul progresses. And he focused on the correspondence between the tarot and esoteric magic and the Kabbalah, a body of Jewish mysticism, to craft new meanings for the cards. Sorry. He also included, as most people know, these simple sort of fortune-telling formulas like perfect contentment and things like that. But really his significant contribution was the use of the major arcana as a meditative and magical map for the soul's transformation. And that's been its purpose and its value for esoteric practitioners ever since. The minors were considered of less importance, although for those who want their cards read, they can often be the most important cards because they truly give you an accurate picture of the life that you're leading and where it's pointing you. And other systems of knowledge, like numerology and astrology, began to be integrated into tarot depiction and interpretation. Of course, the Crowley deck, right? And the tarot became a tapestry that was connecting Western mystical systems. And about 100 years later, no, 1980s, about 80 years later, 70 years later, another school of thought made a major contribution to the interpretation of the tarot, and that was the humanist psychologist, of which Rachel Pollack was a part. So esoteric philosophy and modern psychology were woven together. You hear a lot of Jungian terminology of archetypes. And I think that all of that contributed to the Rider deck becoming the most popular, the most influential, the gold standard, as I said. And it is, in fact, the frame of reference for a lot of modern witches decks that rely on that imagery. But like fish that don't know we're swimming in water, it's really important, especially for witches and for pagans, to understand the deck's values, as Rachel Pollack said, because those values color the advice that it gives us. Okay? So take a close look, right? The Hierophant, the papal, in his papal garb with the crucifixes and the symbols of papal authority. Temperance, the angel, right? Of course, the devil, and Judgment, with this biblical imagery of the graves of the angel heralding the opening of the graves and the ascension of the souls heavenward. So what you see is in the minors an utterly human-oriented deck where nature and the symbols of nature are metaphors. They're backdrops and metaphors. And in the major arcana, you see this tremendous amount of biblical symbolism and figures who are signposts of what's sacred. And the Rider deck was radical in its day, but it was still heavily influenced by Abrahamic theology and thinking, by biblical thinking. And it's not just the individual cards and their symbolism that express certain Abrahamic ideas about the divine and about reality and about the world in which we live and about us. But in naming and numbering them, very important, Waite created an order that presents the spiritual journey that he perceived as most important, as truthful, the soul's journey, and it moves ever upwards and away from the mundane preoccupations, right, of the minor arcana of daily life and the material earthly plane to heavenly realms of pure consciousness, of energy, of transcendent spirit. And, right, this card was the card that I contemplated most before I began the work on the Witch's Wisdom Tarot, because this has always sort of pricked me. And as I studied it more carefully, I realized that it was emblematic of this realization that the values at the heart of the Rider-Waite deck was this journey of the seeker and the seeker soul always away from the material world. And it's perfectly illustrated by this unintentionally ironic image of the final major arcana card, the World, with a floating figure suspended in space surrounded by symbols of 4 archangels, right? So enlightenment means leaving the earth behind. And that's the value system at the heart of the Rider-Waite Tarot. And whether it's consciously intended or not, whether people even recognize that or not, it's the value system that remains entrenched and expressed by the symbols and the imagery and even the order of countless decks based on the Rider deck. And there's wisdom and there's truth in the direction of that journey. There is. We come from spirit, we return to spirit. But there's also been a huge price to pay. Most of the problems that we're facing, that you're facing very dramatically and terrifyingly right now, chokingly, the social and economic injustices that we're struggling against and the terrible consequences of global warming, they all reflect a spiritual crisis, a millennial-old mistake that the divine is not here, it's somewhere else, it's transcendent, it's energy. And enlightenment requires the denial and the domination of matter, of the body, of Mother Earth, of women. And of course, we're in trouble. Something essential is missing. What's missing is witches' wisdom and witches' values. So I know there are as many opinions about what that means as there are witches, but after 40 years, I have learned that while every path is unique, we are all walking in the same landscape. The thing that we share as witches and pagans is an understanding of embodiment. We understand that we are walking in a sacred landscape. The realm of Mother Earth and her wisdom is witch's wisdom. In fact, it's universal wisdom, because regardless of what or how you practice, whatever religion you practice, ultimately we're all children of Mother Earth. And in fact, all creatures live according to her wisdom. Only we humans have forgotten. So the question before me was, how would I go about finding that lost wisdom? Rather than bringing what I already knew to the creation of a deck, I wanted to discover what I didn't know, what we didn't know, and what we needed to know. And so I asked, how do I remember? How do I create a deck that has something of value, that expresses witch's wisdom that hasn't been expressed before? And I asked by journeying, which is an ancient universal shamanic technique. It hacks the brain, it expands our perception into realms of spirit, yes, but its greatest gift I have always found is the ability to see the sacred in realms of spirit, but most importantly, here in this world. That is the gift that we've forgotten. And I asked when I journeyed, what do I need to know to create a new witch's wisdom tarot? And it turned out that even before I had spoken with Danielle, 20 years after, 40 years after I had learned an integrated shamanic technique, cord shamanism, journeying into my cultivation of the Temple of Aura, my tradition of witchcraft. 40 years later, I was speaking to a hedge witch in England who had mastered the same practice and used it and had asked the same question. What do we need to know to create a new witch's tarot? And we were both told the same thing. Begin with the elements. Begin with air, fire, water, and earth, not their symbols. Ask them to show you, and they will. They will show you what the world needs to know. They will show you what the world needs to learn. And it made perfect sense. I remember air, my breath, fire, my spirit, water, my blood, and earth, my body. That was one of the first chants that I learned 40 years ago. And for modern witches, you know, working with the elements has always been a powerful way of deepening our self-awareness, right? The table of correspondences of air with the mind, and fire with power and willpower and courage, water with our emotions and our heart and dreams, the earth with our work, our possessions, our creativity. So we decided, of course, we would follow the guidance that we had been given. And so we went in the order in which witch's circle is cast in the Northern Hemisphere: air in the East, fire in the South, water in the West, earth in the North. We journeyed for every card. And when we were done with the minor arcana, we went on to the major. That was more than 200 journeys all told by the time we were done. And it was an epic quest. And it was an epic quest to discover what we didn't know, what the world had forgotten and needed to remember. We often had similar experiences, not surprisingly, and yet amazingly, and similar images, similar teachings. And often we found that when we put our different journeys together, that's when the meaning was fully revealed. And we were accompanied every step of the way by wise guides and compassionate teachers. We were immediately accompanied by Fox, Grandmother Toad, the Briar Rose, which became the Compass Rose as the journey went forward, and of course the wise Mycelium. Along with other spirits and allies and guides, they led us not just through realms of spirit, but back into this world, into a world that was full of divinity, wisdom, wildness, wonder, revelation, and truly raw magic. And as I began to write the text, it became increasingly important to me to write a new kind of text. The imagery is always so essential with the power of a deck and its usefulness. And I think texts have been underutilized as a means of themselves, stirring visions, offering them, and invoking them, and making magic themselves. And so, of course, as a writer and a witch, I wanted to write a text that would offer the journeys and the teachings that we had been offered, but that would be visionary and vision provoking, that would be magical and magic making. And so every text has a wisdom section, which is also an invocation, a meditation, and a way of making magic. And it contains very practical counsel and also contains magic. So every card has magic that ranges from old spells to invoke Devonshire pixies to working with fog and wolf. And as we journeyed, the experiences were profound. I mean, I greeted the rising sun at dawn with baboons and was shown the self-awareness of nature. We dove deep into grief and were taught beauty by singing whales. We flew in the mystery of murmuration and communion with starlings at sunset. And I want to just read you a bit of text for the murmuration, which is the 10 of air. We didn't bring a numerological intention to this, but I will share with you briefly that one emerged as we were working, and the 10s were always cards of communion. So the murmuration. There's a wondrous spectacle in the invisible air where everything is connected. A murmuration of starlings has appeared to fill the autumn sky with blissful whirling. It's dusk. The sun is setting on the edge of the earth, and the shape-shifting flocks are filling the world with their magic. Every bird connected to every other bird by a mystery. They are rippling, spinning, plunging, and ascending in unison. The pattern transformed in an instant as 100,000 starlings turn together as one. In the presence of magic, we bear witness to the wind between the stars, the divine love that connects all things and fills the world with wonder beyond understanding. That wisdom is followed by essence, which are a few keywords in the tradition of few keywords for tarot text. For a quick reading or for a more elaborate one, wonderment, intuitive harmony, communion, and consciousness of divine love. And there's a counsel which provides very practical advice, because divination, while being a form of communication and communion with the divine, also always has practical counsel. So the counsel here is, it's time to let go of the need for explanations, reasons, and rational understanding. There's wisdom in your heart that's longing to be free. You're on a journey to awareness beyond the self, inspired by something mysterious and beautiful that is part of you and greater than you. Stand in awe of the divinity beyond explanation. Let your spirit soar. And the magic has to do with finding a murmuration near you. So I will save that. And I will skip through a few more of these because I'm short on time. The elements turned out that as they revealed themselves to us as forces of nature and embodied by plants and animals and birds and insects, by the full measure and diversity of creation, it was very clear that they are far more than human symbols or metaphors, which is how we have tended to confine them in the language and system of the tarot. They're potent forces of nature, and they have their own intrinsic value, their own purpose, and their own consciousness. They are embodiments of holy wisdom, like the plants and the animals who dwell within them, who embody them. They are our teachers and our healers, and they are our guides to the path home, to wholeness. Air, fire, water, earth, the animals and plant peoples, the nature spirits and the spirits of the place all appeared, and they revealed to us a world of beauty and complexity, of balance and harmony and peace and healing. They revealed to us that we cannot fully know who we are to make those simple decisions. Should I get married? Should I move? Should I take the job? We cannot know who we are, and we must know who we are in order to make those decisions until we know where we are. The Witch's Wisdom Tarot, turns out, will provide that very sort of practical method to move in with the boyfriend or move out of town. But most of all, it began to show us the divine context in which we reside. And it is intended, and I hope you will find that it shows you a world that encompasses our humanity and stretches it far beyond our traditional conscious limits. And as you'll see, there are no crucifixes, no Damocles swords hanging over our heads, no misers clutching coins to his chest. There is, right, here we go, none of that. Rather, there is a divine and natural world and wisdom that we have forgotten. That is an essential part of who we are and how we're meant to live and how we're meant to make magic. And while at first it might seem, where am I, right? Where am I to be found in all of this? In fact, we are present. Let me see if I can find for you. I'd like to read this one for you. Because this is one of my very favorite cards. And it contains within it what I call one of the first principles. And it also offers a very different view of the teachings of the elements and the creatures with whom we share this planet that have a really potentially profound impact for us as witches and as pagans and as makers of magic. So we learned a great deal, and I'll talk a little bit more about it before I move on to the major arcana, about how to work with the elements in a very different way than most of us have been doing. So this is the wisdom of the two of water, which is also called harmony. Water connects all things. Two otters, one upon the shore, the other emerging from the water, recognize each other and draw close. Like other water creatures, they are playful because they feel the love of the waters in which they live. In this harmony, it's effortless for them to fill the waters of life with their happiness. Round and round they swim, chasing each other, holding each other as they float. How naturally they embody joy as they take care of themselves and each other. How magically they make the waters in which they swim, the world in which they live, better for all life. And this is the counsel. What you put into the waters of life is what you take from the waters of life. It can be difficult to love yourself or love people who are indifferent or selfish or destructive. But love has many forms: kindness, compassion, patience, decency. Begin with small acts of self-love and allow Otter to teach you to play, to swim, to live. Look into Otter's pool and see yourself. And sometimes it can be hard to see. When we look into nature, it can be hard to see ourselves. And so one of the marvelous things that happened as I was journeying, we were journeying to find a new tarot of witches' wisdom, was the transformation of the court cards. In fact, I call them shapeshifters. And you'll love that. She's like, that's what they are. Rather than the court cards, right, which relied on a hierarchy of medieval patriarchal nobility with pages and knights and queens and kings, the shapeshifters, and you'll see one each from each of the four elements: the messenger of air, the witch of water, the craftsman of fire, and the goddess of earth here on your screen. Instead, we have beings who are bridges, who merge humans with spirit and nature, just as we do. And those are the lessons that they have to teach us. They're guides into the mysteries of this magical and divine oneness. When you look at the minor arcana cards of this Witch's Wisdom Tarot, you may feel like you've entered an alien world, but that's because we've become so cut off from nature that we don't recognize how much it is a part of us and we are a part of it. Excuse me. But as you work with the cards, as you work with the teachings and the wisdoms that they offer, you begin to see not just their beauty, but ours, not just the wisdom of their lives, but our life. I remember years ago, in college in some course, there was a criticism from the professor of how humans we anthropomorphize nature, and how naive and mistaken that is. This is a wonderful talk about spirits of nature and spirits of place. But in fact, I think the mistake that we've made is not that, but rather in failing to understand that we are of nature. And by not understanding, we don't understand. By not understanding nature, we don't understand ourselves. And this deck speaks with the voice of nature, with air and fire and water and earth, as it spoke for itself. And of course, it is subject to the frailties of a human interpretation, but we've done the best that we can to both show it and to share what we were shown, and to share what we learned. And in the process, it was a profoundly transformative journey for us, and we began to remember where we are, and therefore who we are, and therefore why we are here. And that is the question, I think, before all of us, certainly as witches and pagans today. The elements want us to remember that they are part of us, just as we are part of nature. Each card really is a revelation of missing wisdom about nature and spirit, and some missing natural and divine part of ourselves. And they offer us a healing path to wholeness. And so they also offered us, in that journey to wholeness, important new lessons about their true natures and ours, and especially in offering us paths back to this unknown parts of ourselves, and to this awareness beyond ourselves, an awareness of ourselves as part of a greater interdependent and divine whole. They showed us, they challenged us. They challenged the way that we humans and we witches and we pagans think about and interact with nature. And we were shown some important new ways of approaching and working with the elements when we made magic. And so every card contains a magic, and the text also offers quite a number of ways of making magic with them, based upon the request that they made again in each of the elemental forms. And they asked us to stop using them. And when I go back and I look at some of the texts from my early books, and I look at what other people say, I find that language, right? That we use air, that we use fire, that we use water for cleansing, for example. And they asked us to stop using them for these very selfish purposes. And they showed us how to work with them for our well-being, because they want our well-being. Our well-being is connected to theirs. But they showed us how to work with them for purposes that are greater than our own, for the great magic of creation. Otters were the teachers very much of, for example, water. That we traditionally use water, right, to clean away negativity and pain and suffering, just the way we all use water every day, right, to clean away waste, to wash the dishes or our clothes. But water was very clear and asked us that instead of putting our garbage into water to be taken away, we were told to bring water's purity into ourselves. And that purity then transforms us from within and is a blessing that we can receive with gratitude. And then what leaves us and returns to the great waters can be recycled and put to good use by nature. Self-care and care of nature are in harmony, and we practice that way, I especially, and it in fact works. So I want to move to, I hate to, but I'm going to move a little more quickly. Ace of Air, that's the wind harp, which is wonderful. The 5 cards appeared because in fact, nature is full of challenges. And it turned out that each of the 5 cards expressed some form of elemental challenge, of consequences, some of them dire, as you can see in the 5 of water, or dangers. But always along with those challenges and choices, the choices were offered. And consistently, the elemental energies and the animals and the plants always reveal themselves as life-sustaining powers, of love and joy and support and healing, even in the context of death. And it made perfect sense because we knew, I know, and that was what I tried to express in the text. And certainly it is imbued in all of these amazing images by Danielle, that at the heart of the wisdom that we were being shown and that we have shown in the Witch's Wisdom Tarot was the unity of spirit and creation, of energy and embodiment, of nature and all of us. And nature truly is our great spiritual teacher. We had to struggle with a lot of grief as we came to terms with the damage we've done, but over and over again, we were shown healing and inspiration and empowerment and the magic to create the future that we want and that we need and that the earth wants and need, that the future of all living things deserve. So we were getting simple answers to simple questions. Shall I move? Shall I marry? But we were getting them in the context of the great calling that all of us, I think, now are hearing. And we were told, and it was quite straightforward, that everything we need to remedy the damage we've done, to heal ourselves and our planet, is around us and within us. They showed us how to contend with all the challenges of life. And they did it because of their compassion and their love and their essential nature, which is the sustenance of life. So they reveal how energy and embodiment are one, how spirit and earth are one, and that's where all the magic comes from. And those are the values of the Witch's Wisdom Tarot. And so it made perfect sense that we had been asked to start with the elements and not with the major arcana, because there were lessons for us to learn, even as witches who were very attentive to the wisdom of Mother Earth, the Sabbats, the lunar rites that we'd done for years. But we needed to learn in a deeper, more profound and intimate way. And then it was time to start with the major arcana. And the fact is, the major arcana are cards of destiny. And when they appear, we can sense that there is something life-changing and sacred that's summoning us. And we know that magic is happening. They're like holy fountains. It's the phrase I always use. They carry boulders and they carry gold and they erupt from deep within, and they come from realms of spirit to disrupt our plans, and they challenge our expectations, and they push us past our limitations. Their energies, they catalyze our lives and they galvanize our inner divinity, and they express and they embody the divinity within which we reside. And when the divine speaks to us through the tarot, the major arcana are messengers that really command our attention. And so we set off on intending to travel the well-traveled path of the Rider-Waite deck, that, starting with the Fool, and then the Magician and the Priestess and the Goddess, the Empress and the Emperor and the Hierophant, and so on, until ultimately we reached the World, which I've already shown you. And my first journey into the major arcana was a shock, because my first journey into the major arcana was into the world. I was in this world at this very moment, burning in Washington, in Oregon, in California, prophesying in a sense, because this journey was well over a year ago, and yet describing exactly what's happening, not just in your state, but throughout the world, which is civilized and self-destructing. And at the same time, it was still wildly natural and beautifully sacred, and waiting for us and calling us. And I saw this young woman in hiking boots striding away from this burning metropolis. And I soon realized that she was the pilgrim. And believe me, she's nobody's fool. And for the next 21 days, we journeyed every day for 21 days. We traveled with her. And the next journey, get a glimpse of her there. The next journey, we were not sure. Would it be the Magician? Where would we be? And I knew that it was the Judgment card but it wasn't the judgment card. It was totally different circumstances, yeah, from the judgment card. There was no angel opening, graves and calling people forth from their graves. There was no Christian imagery, no heavenly angels. Instead, there was the beginning of the pilgrim's initiation. She is letting go of the past. She is seeing herself in the waters before her. She's drinking to purify, and the animals are helping her. There's a badger that's carrying off her boot, and the little baby foxes who are everywhere, guiding us through this deck, and you'll meet them, as I said earlier. Fox will guide you through. It's just extraordinary. And the crow is pulling off her hat in the tradition of Gardnerian and Neo-Gardnerian initiations, where everything is removed, that we drop the trappings of our past life. And I knew it was to take the place of number 20, the judgment card in the Rider deck. And I knew it was the card of initiation, even before I discussed it, the vision with Danielle. And as far as I know, and speaking with friends and tarot readers and tarot experts, it constitutes the first reversal of the Major Arcana's course in the history of the tarot. And the journey proceeded, and we went from the world to judgment, now the initiation. We did go to sun and moon and stars, and it proceeded not backwards, but deep and in, and it made perfect sense for a witch's tarot, perfect sense. The major arcana of the Witch's Wisdom Tarot is it's the ancient ancestral path of initiation. It's universal. Its direction is down and into oneself, into the womb of Mother Earth, not upwards into the Father's heaven. And then, having made that descent into embodiment, transformed and enlightened, and embodying the divine oneself, recognizing that spark within, then we return to a world and we can see it differently. We see it now. We recognize that the world in which we are living every day is divine. It's a ritual that's well known, obviously, to British traditional witches and other traditions, and all indigenous peoples in their own unique ways. And it's a spiritual journey to our authentic self and to a world that embodies the sacred. And on this path, the pilgrim is unmade in order to be made again. The artifices of ego and social conditioning are dismembered, and the wounds of childhood and culture start to heal. And she's guided and aided along the way by loving and compassionate spirits and teachers and deities and wise ones. And finally, she gives birth to herself, empowered and enlightened and embodied. And the journey was exquisite. We were given, it was a journey into a magical circle. And we were given new guides and new teachers and new cards. Balance for example, takes the place of justice. It's a different kind of fairness that does not require enforcement by the sword. And it reminds us that we all come from spirit and return to spirit, but the journey of the soul is through life, through the earth, through the challenges and the blessings and the magic of manifestation. And in our Major Arcana Tarot, the pilgrim descends into the heart of our humanity, and she returns to the divine embodiment of creation with a new understanding of the wheel of life, of the life she's leading as part of a greater life. And that's the path of life. It's lived consciously and with reverence in the body and from the heart. It's the path of the divine taking form through creation and through us, which is where magic comes from. And the pilgrim discovers that there is no split between spirit and world, because both of them exist within her as she exists within them. And on this path of enlightenment, in the Witch's Wisdom Tarot, enlightenment is discovering that divine energy is embodied by creation and by each of us. That's the context in which we live, the context in which wise decisions are made, the context in which magic is made. One of the wonderful things, just to move more quickly through, to show you a few things, one of the things that we loved right away was the diversity with which both the pilgrim appeared and the teachers and the guides appeared. You'll see with the offering, the star is very different. Rebirth takes the place of death, for example, and the sun was a profound card that came before all of the experiences that are now such an important part of our cultural journey in seeking racial and social justice, has a profound and beautiful and deeply heartfelt new meaning. And on this journey, the pilgrim literally changed genders and ages and races. She remained recognizable by the pentacle that they wore around their neck. It's an apple slice in which 5 seeds appear, and 1 seed appears as they make progress along this journey. And it's a journey in which they are repeatedly unmade and then made again as new wisdom appears. And there were lots of new cards and new meanings. Love, for example, is no longer the lovers of the Rider-Waite deck, which was a heterosexual couple. Now it's love, experienced and expressed by the pilgrim and her familiar, the deck's guide, one of the deck's guides, the fox. And it's one of my favorite journeys and one of my favorite cards. And you can feel the love radiating outward from the pilgrim and the fox as they encompass each other and the world that holds them within the embrace of its love. And it's very much about love as the magic of creation. There are also, the ancestor takes the place of the devil, who is long gone and has no place in a witch's deck. And the Hierophant is now gone, replaced by the wisdom keeper. The shaman, who is always accompanied by spirits and guides, takes the place of the hermit. And I want to just read to you the wisdom keeper, and then unfortunately just one more card because we're running out of time. So this is the wisdom keeper, which you'll see in the center of that slide. And this was one of the most remarkable journeys that we both shared, which was one reason that it was so profound. As the pilgrim journeys on, somewhere a wisdom keeper is waiting. A sudden dip in the path, an unexpected detour, a sharp intake of breath upon the sighting of a deer, and then as if by magic, the wisdom keeper appears. The pilgrim feels the subtle shift, feels electricity charge the air and prick her skin, feels her breathing shorten and the beating of her heart quicken. She pauses, prays, then pulls aside a teepee flap and steps inside into blackness. Quickly stepping out again, she sees her breath in the freezing air and feels cold snow beneath her feet. She steps back inside the lavvo, and in the darkness hears a woman ululating. She smells goats and hears their bells clinking. She steps outside again. It's hot and dry, and there are women cooking. She sees desert all around her. Men are shouting, moving horses and camels. Everyone everywhere is getting on with life. The pilgrim steps back inside the meharim. It's dark and musty. A stove is burning and it smells of smoke, black tea and leather. She steps outside again into a thick, wet forest. Back in, and the wind gusts wildly through the tent, swirling the magic that surrounds her. She hears many things on that wind. Voices, animals, people moving, life moving in cycles. The wisdom inside aligning with the wisdom outside. She steps outside. The pilgrim has journeyed a long way to receive enlightenment. She sits before the wisdom keeper. A sacred bundle lies open between them, revealing the medicine within. Healing plants and offerings, objects of power and tokens of revelation. They are spread out upon the ground, each one a part of the mystery hiding in plain sight. Pilgrim and wisdom keeper sit silently together as life goes on around them. The pilgrim rises and departs. A pilgrim arrives at the wisdom keeper's tent. The sound of distant caribou bells is carried on the wind. The journey proceeds. She moves through different landscapes, through healing, which takes the place of the angel temperance, through the maze, which takes the place of the deus ex machina of the tower, along the journey. Rebirth replaces death. The hangman is replaced by offerings. And there is a very new and remarkable kind of strength that's offered and discovered. The wisdom moved from the Arctic Circle to Africa, from the Fertile Crescent to the deserts of the American Southwest. And every teacher was deeply compassionate, expansively wise, and embodied. And we trusted what was shared with us. We respected the universal wisdom that they had to share with us. And that in sharing what they shared with us, we weren't appropriating those diverse cultural contexts. Diversity is a deep and it's a universal spiritual truth. And it's embodied by the natural world and the way in which we maintain a resilient tapestry that reflects this embodied divinity of Mother Earth.
Phyllis, this has been really amazing. We can probably go a little long. I know there's a bunch of questions, and you have an upcoming new presentation at the Theosophy Society, and I'm sure everyone would love to know where they can acquire the deck. So I'm going to be quiet and let you maybe look at some of the questions.
Okay, so let me conclude, and I will just say that in the end, we ended not with the magician, but with the Council of All Beings, which was a place of calling and summoning that welcomes all of us into the circle of life and into the divine embodiment that we are part of. And in that communion, magic flows. So every deck has, every card has its magic, and there are ways to make magic beyond the simple magic offered at the end of each one. I found it an extraordinary journey. I hope that you will find it so yourselves. I hope that it will help awaken the magic within you and awaken you to the magic of the world in which you live. It is a magic that we all need now to create the future that we're intended to have. I feel blessed to have made the journey, honored to share it with you. I hope it offers you paths home to wholeness and to healing. And I look forward to sharing it with you in the future. And that's it. So let's see if I can figure out how to get the questions.
I have them for you.
Oh, thank you so much.
There's really two that are very important. One, could you please explain what a journey is for those who've not made that journey? Since that was so important for the deck, it'd be good to have a context for that.
Wonderful. And in fact, I explain how to journey in the guide to the deck. So journeying is an ancient universal shamanic practice used by our Euro-Indigenous ancestors, used by our African ancestors all over the globe, by the indigenous peoples of the Americas, everywhere. It's the use of steady percussive rhythm. It's come in modern parlance to be called a core shamanic technique. I prefer universal technique. It's an essential method which does not have a cultural overlay. And what we've learned over the 40 years of this technique being used by contemporary practitioners is that steady percussive rhythm, approximately 200 beats a minute. One of my drums behind me. Drums are the most remarkable and effective, but can be click sticks that are used by the Australian Aboriginal community. It can be rattles that were used, for example, by the priestesses in the temples of Egypt, but steady percussive rhythm. And you find this use of the drum throughout the Fertile Crescent and throughout Europe. One of the first things destroyed by the church were the drums. 200 beats a minute alters the brain's waves. You go from normal consciousness, basically beta, to theta, which is a longer, deeper wave. It's a visionary state. It's a state in which you are able to enter realms of spirit, to work with spirits, spirits of place, nature spirits, spirit guides, Power animals is a common term. And they teach you, they show you healing. It's used for communion, for divination, prophecy, practical purpose, where to hunt, take the job, etc. What plants will heal, what is wrong with this person, and what plants will help heal them. The most important gift, and that's an example that I found in the beginning of my work with this as a tool, was the first one to integrate it into contemporary witchcraft 40 years ago, when I began working with Michael Harner's core shamanic practices. And the very first shamanic group to come out of his work it was amazing to enter realms of spirit and to discover the reality of it, and that it could be shared by other people who were journeying with you, as it was when Danielle worked with me in creating this deck and finding this deck. But the greatest gift, and it's taken me years to mature into this, is the gift that you get when you return to this world with new eyes and you're able to see the sacred, not just in realms of spirit, but embodied by this world. And anyone can do it. It's a simple, practical, effective technique. I teach it in other courses. And I think it's an essential practice for all pagans, for all, revivalists of Euro-Indigenous or African Indigenous, for any Indigenous tradition. It's used by Indigenous peoples all over the world. It's a shared practice. It brings you into community and into communion with the divine. And I'm a big advocate. It is probably one of the most powerful tools that anybody can use for the purposes of divination, communication, communion, and magic. Great question. Second question.
If we have enough time for one more question, I believe. One more. Thank you, Lawrence. One of them was, you identified the Abrahamic divination system as an escape or transcendence from the physical plane. So would you say the ultimate goal of this deck, of the Witch's Wisdom deck, is to bring us into a communal relationship with the material plane, or is there something else beside that?
Let's see if I can explain it briefly. There is wisdom and beauty and truth, right, in the movement of our souls towards spirit. I just explained journeying, right, which takes us into realms of spirit. They are accessible to us. And the Rider Waite Smith deck, working an esoteric system, understood the accessibility of realms of spirit. But the value, the core value, the heart value was a perception of value very much left over from the Abrahamic, that energy is what is sacred, right? That it is that God is transcendent, and that the world itself is devoid of divinity. And it is the opposite perspective of Indigenous perspectives, which sees the world itself, all of it, as the embodiment of divinity. So the essence of the Witch's Wisdom Tarot and the way it works and the revelations that it shares and the magic that it sort of awakens and begins to manifest as you're working with it is this awakening to the divine within oneself, and embodied by you, embodied by all of creation. The energy that is sacred is expressed through creation and exchanged through all of creation, moving backwards and forwards through each of us, from plants into us, from us back to plants. There's a constant movement of energy. That's what the Sabbats are about. And the lunar rites help you to come into attunement with the movement of those rhythmic cycles of energy, of creation. So when you work with this deck, you work it with spirit guides, and you are able, especially when you use the wisdom portion, to enter realms of spirit and to work with spirit beings. But the gift that they're giving you is the capacity to see spirit embodied by creation, given form by the material world. There is no distinction, in fact, between energy, right? Is it light? Light. Is it a particle or a wave? The answer is yes, right? The divine. Is it energy or embodiment? The answer is yes. And the gift of the Witch's Wisdom Tarot is very much a focus on how the divine is embodied by the earth, because that is the lost wisdom, right? Because we've been focused on the movement away and out towards energy. And this deck is really devoted to gifting you the capacity to see that energy embodied in your life and in the life of the world that you're participating in. Does that answer your question? Great question. Smart question.
Very good.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And we look forward to having you back this afternoon for your second presentation. The schedule is in the chat, and please go out, make your intentions known, register to vote, and blessed be. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.